He laughed at my cooking, mocked it really, as though the meals I'd poured my heart into were nothing more than a joke. And that night, I decided if he wanted to make fun of me, I'd give him an audience. Tell me, has anyone ever belittled your efforts, only for you to find the perfect way to turn the tables? Drop your story in the comments. I'd love to hear. Now, let's get straight into today's tale, where one husband's careless words met a dinner invitation he never saw coming. It started on an ordinary Tuesday evening. The house smelled of roasted chicken, garlic, and fresh bread. I had spent the better part of the afternoon preparing it, humming softly to myself as I set the table. Cooking wasn't just a chore to me, it was love in edible form. But when my husband walked through the door, briefcase in hand, his expression wasn't warm. He loosened his tie, sniffed the air, and smirked. "Chicken again?" he said with that tone, the one that dripped with mockery. "Don't you ever get tired of pretending you're a chef?" The words stung. I tried to brush them off, tried to focus on the clinking of cutlery and the comfort of the meal I'd made, but as we sat down, he didn't stop. "This bread is hard enough to break a tooth," he joked, laughing to himself as he chewed. "You should take lessons from someone who knows what they're doing." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. The meal I had poured myself into suddenly tasted bland, like ashes. I pushed my fork gently against the plate, willing the tears to stay put. "You don't have to eat it if you don't like it," I said quietly. He chuckled again. "I am eating it. I just think you should face facts. You're not cut out for this." That was the moment something shifted inside me. For years, I had brushed off the little digs, the smirks, the casual remarks meant to chip away at me. But that night, I decided I wasn't going to swallow it down anymore. Not the food, and not his cruelty. As he carried on, oblivious, an idea sparked. A wild, daring idea. What if I turned his mockery into a stage? What if the next time he laughed at me, he wouldn't be laughing alone? That night, after he went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table in the glow of the lamp, notebook open. I made a list of names. His boss's name was the first on the page. I could already picture it. The look on his face when the man he admired most sat at our table, eating the very food he ridiculed. The thought made me smile for the first time that evening. For the next week, I planned in secret. I bought fresh ingredients, tried new recipes, tested flavors when he wasn't home. I took notes, adjusted seasonings, perfected dishes I hadn't dared attempt before. And when I was ready, I made the call. "Mr. Reynolds," I said, my voice steady. "This is Margaret, Dan's wife. I was wondering if you and your wife might like to join us for dinner one evening. I'd love the chance to get to know you better." There was a pause, then a warm laugh on the other end. "Well, that sounds delightful," his boss said. "How about this Friday?" I smiled to myself, glancing toward the living room where my husband sat flipping through channels, unaware. Friday would come soon enough, and when it did, the mocking tone he used so freely might finally choke in his throat. Friday loomed on the calendar like a secret only I carried. Each day that week, I moved through the house with a quiet focus, slipping ingredients into the pantry and refrigerator, hiding recipe notes between cookbooks, rehearsing in my head what I'd make. To my husband, nothing seemed unusual. He carried on as always, complaining about work, scrolling his phone at the table, tossing little barbs about my meals. "What's this supposed to be?" he said one night, poking at a stew. "Another experiment?" I smiled softly, biting back the retort on my tongue. If only he knew. By Thursday, I had everything ready. The menu was ambitious. Rosemary lamb, roasted vegetables, a creamy mushroom risotto, and for dessert, a chocolate torte I'd tested 3 times to get right. I even borrowed special serving dishes from a neighbor, polishing them until they shone. The irony was almost comical. My husband had no idea that the very meals he ridiculed were about to become the centerpiece of an evening that could make, or break, his reputation. Friday morning, I awoke early, nerves fluttering in my stomach. The house was quiet as I brewed coffee and laid out my prep list. Step by step, I told myself. This wasn't just dinner, it was a performance, and every performance needed rehearsal, timing, and confidence. By noon, the kitchen was alive with motion. The scent of garlic and herbs filled the air, pots simmered gently, and trays slid in and out of the oven. I worked with precision, but also with heart. Every slice, every stir, every taste was more than cooking. It was reclaiming something he'd tried to strip from me. Pride. Meanwhile, my husband lounged in the living room, oblivious. He flipped through channels, grumbling about the news, completely unaware that I had already set the table with my grandmother's china and polished the silverware until it gleamed. Around 3 o'clock, he wandered into the kitchen. "You're really going all out, aren't you?" he said, eyeing the spread. I wiped my hands on a towel and smiled. "I thought it might be nice to try something new." He shrugged. "Well, I hope it's edible." He chuckled at his own joke and walked away. I let the words slide off me this time, because tonight, those very words would boomerang back at him. As the clock ticked closer to 6, I slipped into my dress. Nothing fancy, but elegant enough to show I had prepared with care. I touched up my hair, dabbed on a little perfume, and looked at myself in the mirror. For once, I didn't feel like the woman who had been diminished by endless little jokes. I felt strong, ready. At 6:30 sharp, the doorbell rang. My husband rose from the couch, confusion flickering across his face. "Were you expecting someone?" I smiled calmly. "Yes, guests for dinner." He frowned, adjusting his shirt as he walked to the door. When he opened it, the color drained from his face. Standing there was Mr. Reynolds, his boss, and Mrs. Reynolds, both carrying a bottle of wine and warm smiles. "Dan," Mr. Reynolds boomed. "What a wonderful surprise. Your wife was kind enough to invite us over. We're so glad to be here." My husband's jaw tightened. He shot me a quick, sharp glance, but I only returned it with a sweet smile. Come in," I said warmly, taking their coats. "Dinner is just about ready." As I led them into the dining room, my husband followed stiffly, caught completely off guard. And as the aroma of the dishes filled the air, I saw Mr. Reynolds inhale deeply and smile. "It smells incredible in here," he said. And for the first time in a long while, it wasn't mockery that filled the room. It was anticipation. The table was set, the candles flickered softly, and the dishes glistened under the warm light. I carried in the first platter, herb-roasted lamb, perfectly browned and steaming with rosemary and garlic. "Wow," Mrs. Reynolds said, her eyes widening. "This looks like something out of a magazine." I smiled graciously. "Please sit. There's plenty more." My husband sat rigidly at the head of the table, still recovering from the shock. He cleared his throat, tugged at his collar, and forced a smile. "Yes, well, Margaret likes to dabble in the kitchen." His voice cracked slightly on the word dabble. I set down the risotto next, its creamy aroma filling the room. Mr. Reynolds leaned forward, inhaling deeply. "If this tastes half as good as it smells, Margaret, you may have spoiled us for every restaurant in town." I caught my husband's eye across the table. His forced smile faltered. Conversation flowed easily as the meal began. Mrs. Reynolds complimented the presentation, the balance of flavors, the way the lamb melted in her mouth. Even Mr. Reynolds, a man known for his blunt honesty, was effusive. "This risotto," he said, pointing with his fork, "is cooked perfectly. Do you know how many chefs overcook mushrooms? You've nailed it." Heat rose in my cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from pride. For once, my cooking wasn't a joke. It was the star. My husband, however, pushed his food around in silence. Every compliment landed like a stone on his chest. At one point, Mr. Reynolds looked directly at him. "Dan, you've been holding out on us. Why didn't you tell me your wife was such a talented cook?" My husband swallowed hard, then let out a weak laugh. "Oh, you know, she tries." but his voice lacked conviction. I poured wine, keeping my smile steady. Inside, my heart thrummed with quiet satisfaction. This was the stage I had envisioned, and the performance was going exactly as planned. When dessert arrived, a rich chocolate torte dusted with powdered sugar, Mrs. Reynolds let out a soft gasp. "Oh my, you've made this yourself too?" "Yes," I said. "It's one of my favorites." She took a bite and closed her eyes. "This is heavenly," Mr. Reynolds nodded in agreement. "You've got real talent, Margaret. Have you ever thought of catering? People would pay good money for food like this." I laughed lightly, waving off the suggestion, but his words sank in. Perhaps I had underestimated myself all these years. Across the table, my husband's expression hardened. He shifted uncomfortably, clearly unaccustomed to being overshadowed, especially in front of the man who held his career in his hands. As the evening wore on, the compliments didn't stop. Every dish was savored, every plate nearly cleaned. The Reynolds were warm, engaging, and genuinely appreciative. At one point, Mrs. Reynolds leaned toward me and said softly, "You must teach me some of your tricks. I've been trying to master risotto for years." I smiled, glancing at my husband as I replied, "I'd be happy to, though some people in this house might say I'm not cut out for cooking." The words hung in the air like a spark. Mr. Reynolds raised his brows, curiosity flickering in his eyes. My husband quickly forced a laugh, trying to brush it off. "She likes to tease," he muttered. But the damage was done. The balance at the table had shifted. The boss no longer saw me as a quiet background figure. He saw me as capable, talented, even admirable. And he saw my husband squirm. By the time coffee was poured, I could feel the tension radiating from across the table. My husband's smirk, once so confident, had crumbled. And I knew then the lesson wasn't finished yet. The real impact of this dinner would come after the guests had gone. By the time the evening wound down, every plate was empty, and every glass had been refilled at least twice. Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds stood in the doorway, thanking me again and again. "Margaret, this was truly a treat," Mrs. Reynolds said, slipping her coat on. "I'll be dreaming about that dessert tonight." Mr. Reynolds shook my hand warmly. "Outstanding meal. Truly, you've got a gift." Then he clapped my husband on the shoulder. "You're a lucky man, Dan." I didn't miss the way my husband stiffened under the praise. His forced laugh echoed awkwardly as he mumbled, "Yes, I suppose I am." When the door finally closed behind them, silence settled over the house. The warm glow of the evening dimmed, replaced by the heavy weight of what was unsaid. I began clearing the plates, stacking them carefully. My husband lingered in the living room, pacing once, twice, then finally bursting out, "What was that stunt supposed to be?" I set a plate down gently, refusing to match his raised tone. "A dinner," I said simply. He scoffed. "Don't play coy with me. You blindsided me, inviting my boss without telling me. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was?" I turned slowly, meeting his eyes. "Humiliating for you, or enlightening for him?" His face flushed. "You made me look like a fool." I let the words hang, then spoke evenly. "No, Dan. You did that yourself. You've been mocking me for years, turning my meals into punchlines. Tonight, you finally had to sit and listen as someone with real influence told you the opposite of what you've always said." He opened his mouth, then shut it again. His hands clenched at his sides. I stepped closer, my voice steady, almost calm. "Do you know what it felt like, Dan? To hear you tell me, again and again, that I wasn't good enough? To see you laugh while I poured myself into every dish? Tonight wasn't about revenge. It was about showing you what you refused to see." He shook his head, muttering, "You think you're clever. You think you won tonight." I tilted my head, my expression soft but firm. "I don't need to win. I just needed you to stop underestimating me." For once, he had no quick retort. He turned away, sinking into the couch with a huff, his pride bruised. As I finished clearing the table, I felt an unexpected calm settle over me. I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't need to shout, to match his bitterness with my own. The evening had spoken for me, louder than any argument ever could. Later, as I washed the last dish, he finally broke the silence. His voice was lower, quieter, stripped of its usual mockery. "They really liked your food?" I dried my hands on a towel, glancing toward him. "Yes, they did." He shifted uncomfortably, then muttered, "I didn't realize." But his words trailed off, unfinished. I smiled faintly to myself. For years, I had waited for acknowledgement, for a shred of respect. Tonight, I didn't need him to say the words. His silence was enough. His face, his discomfort, his struggle to reconcile the image he'd built of me with the truth he'd been forced to see. That was victory enough. And as I turned off the kitchen light, I thought, sometimes justice doesn't come in grand gestures or loud confrontations. Sometimes it arrives on a plate seasoned with patience and served with quiet pride. The house was quiet that night, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of old arguments. It was different. My husband sat on the couch, his pride crumpled, while I moved through the kitchen with an ease I hadn't felt in years. For so long I had carried his words on my shoulders. "You're not good at this. You'll never get it right. Why bother trying?" Little jabs, little cuts that piled up until I almost believed them myself. Almost. But that dinner had changed something, not just in him, but in me. As I wiped the counters and tucked away the dishes, I realized I wasn't waiting for his approval anymore. I didn't need his compliments, his acknowledgement, or even his respect to validate what I knew. I was capable, more than capable. The truth had been set on the table alongside the lamb and risotto, and everyone saw it. Everyone who mattered. His boss, his boss's wife, and most importantly, me. When I finally sat down across from him, I saw the weariness in his eyes. He looked smaller somehow, as though the arrogance he carried like armor had cracked. "You blindsided me," he said again, but softer this time. "I wasn't prepared." I met his gaze steadily. "Neither was I. All those times you laughed at me." He flinched at that, his jaw tightening, but he didn't argue. For once, he didn't argue. I leaned back, folding my hands in my lap. "Dan, I don't care if you ever say you're sorry. Tonight wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. And whether you admit it or not, you saw what I can do. You saw it with your own eyes." His lips parted as though he wanted to respond, but no words came. He only nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, before looking away. That small nod was enough. Later, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and let the quiet wash over me. The mocking words he had thrown for years no longer echoed in my head. Instead, I replayed Mr. Reynolds' praise, Mrs. Reynolds' delight, and the way the evening had unfolded in my favor. Justice hadn't come through shouting or arguments. It had come through patience, through the very thing he mocked me for, my cooking. I realized then that sometimes the sweetest form of justice isn't loud or dramatic. It's subtle. It's served in a way that leaves no room for denial. He could try to brush off my feelings, but he couldn't brush off what his boss had seen, what his boss had said. The lesson was sealed in the look on his face, the one that told me he finally understood, even if he couldn't bring himself to say the words out loud. And as I drifted off to sleep, I felt lighter than I had in years. Because no matter how many times he mocked me in the past, I now held a memory stronger than all those jabs combined. The night his laughter was silenced by the truth, served hot and fresh from my own kitchen. So here's what that night taught me. Sometimes the best way to answer mockery isn't with anger, but with proof. Quiet, undeniable proof. My husband thought my cooking was a joke, but when his own boss praised every dish, the joke was no longer mine to carry. We can't always control what others say about us, but we can control how we rise above it, how we choose to turn the very thing they dismiss into the very thing that humbles them. And that's exactly what happened at my dinner table. Have you ever been underestimated, only to surprise everyone with what you could do? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And if you enjoyed this tale, stay with us. There are plenty more twists of justice still to come.